Elias had always sensed there were layers of reality sitting quietly behind the one everyone else called normal, but he never had the words to explain what he felt. It was less like a belief and more like a constant vibration inside his chest, as if something old and familiar were trying to wake up. He spent most of his nights reading, wandering through ancient texts and forgotten fragments, never really knowing why certain passages made his heart race. Everything seemed to point toward some hidden pattern, some structure of protection guarding the space between the human mind and the powers that tried to manipulate it. Still, the meanings never fully settled, until the evening he found the old leather-bound booklet inside a thrift shop box labeled "Spiritual Items, $2 each." The pages were thin, irregular, written with a strange mixture of Greek curls and Aramaic strokes. As he flipped through it, 3 symbols fell out, small flat objects, each carved from separate minerals. One was a red stone etched with a spiral, one a dark fragment with a scratch-like line pattern, and one a pale, almost translucent pebble that shimmered faintly under the store's fluorescent lights. They looked ordinary, but something in his body reacted strongly, the way a tuning fork resonates when struck. It was as though each piece held a frequency, and the moment they touched his palm, his inner field vibrated in response. That night, Elias sat on the floor of his apartment, the 3 stones arranged in a small triangle in front of him. He lit a candle without fully understanding why. The flame didn't stand straight, it bent slightly toward the spiral stone, as if pulled. He watched it for a long time, feeling a soft hum begin at the base of his spine. A memory surfaced, not a personal memory, but something collective, something ancient. He whispered the only words that came to him, "If I am remembering, let it be gentle." The air shifted. It was not dramatic, not cinematic, just a quiet, subtle thickening of the space around him. A warmth spread across the room, like a presence acknowledging his permission. The booklet trembled slightly, and a page flipped itself open. On it, he saw 3 sketches of the very stones lying in front of him. Beneath them was a single sentence: "The anchors of vision restore what the Archons distort." His breath caught. He didn't fully understand, but he felt the truth moving through him like slow liquid light. He picked up the spiral stone first. The moment his fingers wrapped around it, a pulse went through his temples. Images appeared, soft, blurred at first, then sharper. He saw a field of golden mist, a figure standing in the distance, and the faint outline of wings made of light rather than matter. Not an angel in any traditional sense, more like a luminous geometry wearing the idea of a human shape. It didn't speak. Instead, it lifted its hand and pointed at Elias, then pointed downward, toward his chest. The meaning arrived wordlessly: "Your vision was never broken, it was only covered." Elias drew a shaky breath. His heart beat faster, but it wasn't fear, not really. It was the sensation of something lost being returned. The pale stone hummed next, its glow expanding as though recognizing the awakening of the first object. He placed it over his sternum and felt a delicate ripple move through his consciousness. Memories of old self-doubt, internal noise, and subtle emotional interference flickered and dissolved. He saw how many of his thoughts had not been his own, how many impulses had been planted by something external, something hungry for confusion. The stone didn't erase these things, it simply removed their camouflage so he could see them clearly. The dark stone was different. When he lifted it, the room dimmed softly, as if shadows themselves were leaning closer, not with hostility but curiosity. He felt the edge of fear, but then the memory of the luminous figure returned, calming him. Holding the dark stone was like gripping a boundary line, the marker between what belonged to him and what did not. He finally understood why the booklet called them frequency anchors. Each one aligned a different part of his inner space: perception, memory, and sovereignty. He placed all 3 stones together in his lap. The candle flame stretched tall, burning steady and unbroken. A low resonance filled the room, not a sound but a vibration inside his bones. With his eyes closed, he saw the golden figure again, but this time it was closer. The geometry around it rearranged, forming patterns he couldn't decipher but instinctively recognized as protective sigils. The figure's presence carried no superiority, no dominance, only a quiet reassurance, the way a teacher looks at a student who has finally asked the right question. A final insight drifted into his mind, gentle but unmistakably clear: these objects do not give you power. They reveal the power that was always yours before the Archons pulled the veil across your senses. When he opened his eyes, the stones had lost their glow, returning to their ordinary appearance, yet the room still felt expanded, alive. Elias gathered them carefully, placing them back into the triangle. Nothing dramatic happened afterward, no visions, no radiant voices, only a deep, serene certainty rising inside his chest. He had not discovered magic. He had uncovered memory. And with that memory came the understanding that this was only the first step, the first opening, the first gentle lifting of a curtain that had been hanging over his life since birth. He knew now that the teaching was real. But he also sensed there was more, something involving writing, something about the name itself, and that the booklet's next page would reveal what had been waiting for him all along. Elias woke early the next morning, long before the sun rose, with the same instinctive pull he had felt the night before. It wasn't excitement, exactly, more like a quiet summons coming from somewhere just outside ordinary perception. The stones were still arranged in their small triangle on the floor, untouched since he placed them down. Yet the air around them seemed subtly different, as if the room had absorbed a hymn sung in silence. He sat beside them, picked up the booklet again, and let it fall open naturally. This time it landed on a page covered in soft ink strokes, almost faded by age. At the top, in careful handwriting, were 3 words: "Write the name." The simplicity of the instruction made him pause. Beneath it, a short explanation ran along the margin, almost like a note from one student to another across centuries: when the mind is unsteady, the Archons speak first. When the name is close to the body, the monad speaks before they do. Elias traced the sentence lightly with his fingertip. He wasn't sure he understood it, but something about the phrasing made a subtle truth flicker at the edge of his awareness. He grabbed a scrap of paper from his desk, unsure of what the name even meant. Was it symbolic? A phrase? A sigil? The booklet didn't clarify, though somehow he knew that wasn't an accident. It was as if the answer had to emerge from recognition rather than instruction. As he sat still, breathing slowly, a memory rose, not visual, not auditory, but a deep internal recollection, like remembering a scent from childhood. A single word surfaced in his mind. It wasn't English, nor Greek, nor any language he consciously knew. It felt older than language itself, like the resonance of a bell. He whispered it aloud, testing the vibration. The moment it left his lips, the spiral stone at his side trembled gently, confirming what his intuition already knew. He wrote the name on the scrap of paper, the letters flowing effortlessly, as though his hand remembered a script his brain had never learned. The strokes formed a shape reminiscent of a circle split by a vertical line, simple, clean, strangely elegant. The paper warmed under his fingertips, and the sense of clarity that washed over him was so immediate, so profound, that he exhaled without realizing he had been holding his breath. The booklet's notes continued: keep it close to the heart. Wherever the name rests, clarity rises and confusion fades. Elias folded the paper neatly until it formed a tiny square and held it against his chest. A calmness spread through him, dissolving at least 3 of the restless thoughts that had been nibbling at the back of his mind. The effect wasn't supernatural, not in the dramatic sense. Rather, it felt like having a fog cleared from a window he didn't know was clouded. He tucked the folded paper inside his shirt, where it rested directly over his sternum. Only then did he realize how often the noise of stray thoughts had distracted or redirected him, voices that weren't voices, worries that weren't worries, subtle distortions that had shaped decisions and impulses throughout his life. Holding the name against his chest, that noise softened so quickly it startled him. He felt the stillness of his own true mind, a stillness that had always been there but rarely accessible. He stood and walked through his apartment, noticing shifts he hadn't expected. Corners of the room seemed brighter. The shadows looked less oppressive. The air felt clean, peaceful. When he glanced in the bathroom mirror, he noticed a difference in his eyes, not in appearance but in presence. It was as though something behind his gaze had awakened, something alert and centered. As he tested the feeling, a sudden thought arrived, one that didn't feel like his own at first, but wasn't intrusive either. It felt more like guidance. The name is not a word. It is a remembering. He walked back to the stones and placed the folded paper beside them. The pale stone glowed faintly, acknowledging the connection between the two practices, the reawakening of vision and the anchoring of identity. He sat down again and read the next passage, "Carry it with you. Let it soften the pathways the Archons built." The instructions were simple, but the implications were enormous. It meant the Archons, those beings of distortion and interference, did not attack directly. They nudged. They whispered. They created conflicts inside the mind, subtle enough to seem like one's own thoughts. But with the name touching his skin, those whispers lost their sharpness. He could distinguish his genuine emotions from the artificial static. It felt like discovering the difference between true hunger and imagined hunger, between instinct and anxiety. He reached for his jacket, slipped the folded paper into the inner pocket, and felt a quiet certainty settle in his chest. His mind walked more slowly now, not racing ahead the way it usually did. Each thought felt deliberate, rooted, aligned with something deeper than his everyday self. By the time he returned to the booklet, the candle from the night before had burned down nearly to the base, yet the air still carried that warm, golden thickness, like the lingering presence of the luminous figure he had seen in his vision. He turned the page, expecting more explanation, but instead saw a single line: "When the name rests upon you, the Archons lose their first doorway." He understood. Not everything, but enough. Clarity was a form of protection. Alignment was a shield. And the name was not a charm or a mantra, it was a frequency, a reminder of the monad's quiet voice inside the human spirit. Elias closed the booklet gently, holding it in both hands. He breathed in the calm, letting the subtle new silence settle in his mind. Something profound was unfolding, step by step, guiding him toward a sanctuary he had unknowingly been longing for. And the next step, whatever it was, waited quietly on the page he had not yet turned. Elias turned the next page carefully, almost reverently, as though the thin paper carried more than ink. The new page was different from the others, mostly blank, except for a simple hand-drawn symbol near the center. It was a circle with a single point in the middle. No explanation. No accompanying text. Just the drawing, quiet and deliberate. At first glance it looked almost too simple, as though it couldn't possibly hold meaning. Yet the moment Elias focused on it, a soft ringing sensation rippled through his awareness, like hearing the distant echo of a singing bowl. Something in his memory stirred. He had seen patterns like this before, on ancient mosaics, in esoteric diagrams, hidden in the borders of old manuscripts. But this version felt stripped of complexity, reduced to its essential form, like the skeleton of a forgotten truth. As he studied it, the same warm presence he had felt during the visions filled the room again. Not overwhelming, just subtly encircling him, like a hand on the shoulder. He traced the circle with his fingertip, then tapped lightly on the central point. The booklet's earlier phrases echoed in his mind: "Wherever the name is placed, clarity follows." But this symbol, this circle and point, felt different. It wasn't for carrying. It was for creating. A boundary, a perimeter, a declaration of space. Without thinking, he whispered, "A sanctuary." The moment the word left his mouth, the candle beside him flickered in agreement. Instinct guided him to retrieve a sheet of plain paper from his desk. He set it on the floor, placed the booklet beside him, and carefully redrew the symbol with a pen. He didn't worry about precision, somehow the essence didn't depend on perfect lines. Once finished, he set the pen down and looked at his work. The symbol felt alive. Not animated, but present, the way a still pond holds the reflection of the sky. The booklet offered no instruction for what to do next, but his intuition filled the silence. He lifted the sheet and walked slowly through his apartment, sensing where the air felt thinner, where the subtle static of outside influence seemed to linger. When he reached the threshold of his bedroom, something inside him whispered, "Here." He taped the paper to the wall at shoulder height. A gentle tension released immediately, like a knot in the atmosphere loosening. The corners of the room brightened, the shadows softened, and the strange sense of unease that had always lingered near the doorway dissolved into calm. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't mystical in a cinematic way. It felt like cleaning a window, sudden clarity, nothing more and nothing less. Elias stepped back and observed the change. The air hummed with a quiet warmth, the same golden softness he had experienced before. The symbol radiated a kind of silent invitation, a reminder that this small room, this simple space, was now aligned with the same frequency as the name resting near his chest. He felt encouraged to test the sensation. He stood in the doorway and closed his eyes. When he stepped forward into the room, the subtle brightness wrapped around him like a soft blanket. When he stepped back out, the world felt slightly heavier, not dangerous or corrupted, just louder. The contrast was delicate but undeniable. Inside the boundary marked by the symbol, the noise of interference dimmed. He realized then that this wasn't just about personal clarity. It was about place. About home. About creating a pocket of stillness in a world full of distortion. He felt gratitude rise in his chest, quiet, steady, almost reverent, and whispered a soft thank you to whatever guiding presence had led him here. Encouraged, he moved through the rest of his apartment, drawing smaller versions of the symbol on sticky notes and placing them in corners that felt energetically tangled, above the front door, near the kitchen window, behind the living room lamp. Each time he placed one, the atmosphere shifted slightly, as though invisible dust were settling. Within an hour, the entire apartment carried a peaceful, grounded quality he had never felt before. But a surprising new insight dawned as he walked from room to room. The sanctuary expanded not only inward but outward. When he stepped back inside after throwing away the trash, he felt something different, not just the calm in the air, but the gentle sense that the boundary welcomed him, that the apartment itself recognized him. Later that evening, when his friend Mara stopped by unexpectedly, she paused in the doorway with a puzzled look. "Your place feels different," she murmured. "Did you start burning incense or something?" Elias smiled softly. "Something like that." She walked inside, and though she said nothing more, her shoulders visibly relaxed, as if she had stepped out of a storm she hadn't realized she was walking through. Elias watched her, marveling at how the symbol extended its influence not just to him but to anyone who entered. It wasn't selective. It wasn't controlling. It was simply protective, a soft shield, a subtle harmonizing field that smoothed the static both within and around the mind. As Mara talked about her week, Elias noticed how easily he could listen, not being pulled by stray thoughts, not drifting, not feeling the usual undercurrent of interference. The name in his pocket kept his mind centered, and the sanctuary kept his space clear. Together, they created a harmony he hadn't experienced in years. Later that night, alone again, he returned to the booklet and placed it on his lap. The stones glimmered faintly beside him, aware of the transformation happening around them. He felt a sense of completion, as though the first cycle of the teaching had been fulfilled. Still, he knew the story wasn't ending here. Something deeper was awakening, something that would eventually lead him beyond his apartment, beyond symbols and stones, into a wider confrontation with the subtle forces that shape human perception. But for now, just for now, he allowed himself to rest inside the sanctuary he had drawn into existence, letting its gentle stillness settle into his bones. Elias sat quietly in the center of his living room, surrounded by the soft glow of the sanctuary symbols he had placed hours earlier. The stones rested near him, their subtle resonance blending with the gentle silence that filled the space. He could feel the atmosphere holding him, not as a barrier, but as a gentle container, a reminder that his home had become aligned with something ancient and benevolent. He opened the booklet again, turning to its final pages. Most were blank, but on the very last sheet, tucked into the crease, was a folded slip of parchment. It was smaller than the page itself and held shut with a thin line of dried wax. Elias hesitated before breaking it open. Something about the parchment felt different, older, heavier with intention. Inside was a short passage written in the same delicate script as the rest of the booklet: "A sanctuary extends where intention settles. Carry it into the world. Walk slowly. Speak gently. Let every place you enter remember itself through you." The words filled him with a deep, quiet understanding. Everything he had learned so far, the stones, the name, the circle endpoint symbol, was not meant to trap him inside a protected bubble. It was meant to teach him how to walk through the world without losing himself. It was meant to build a clarity strong enough to withstand the subtle noise that existed beyond the boundaries of his home. He stood, feeling the folded name against his chest. It pulsed gently, not with light but with presence, as though reminding him that he was not returning to the outside world alone. Guided by instinct, Elias picked up the spiral stone and slipped it into his pocket. Then he took the pale stone and placed it in his other pocket. The dark stone he kept in his hand, its cool surface grounding him. With each object, he felt a thread of memory connect, like 3 small lanterns illuminating different facets of his inner path. He stepped toward the apartment door and paused. He looked around the sanctuary he had created, the softened corners, the gentle clarity, the sense of peace that had settled into the walls. It wasn't just a space anymore. It was a reflection of his awareness, a living imprint of the connection he had rediscovered. When he finally stepped outside, the world greeted him with its usual noise: cars moving in the distance, conversations floating from open windows, the invisible current of collective emotions swirling through the air. Yet something was profoundly different. The noise didn't pull him. The distractions didn't flood him. The subtle distortions that once tugged gently at his thoughts now slid past him harmlessly. He walked slowly down the sidewalk, watching the way people moved, feeling the shape of the shared atmosphere that hummed between strangers. He could sense the static more clearly now, the emotional residue, the mental fog, the subtle push of unspoken conflicts. None of it overwhelmed him. Instead, he felt a steady anchor in his chest, as if the name was filtering the world through a lens of simplicity and truth. As he passed a small park, he noticed a woman sitting alone on a bench, her posture tight, her hands clasped in tension. The air around her felt dense, tangled, like a storm cloud no one else could see. Elias didn't approach her, he didn't know her story, but he allowed himself to settle gently into his own stillness as he passed. Something shifted. The tension around her softened, just slightly, like a knot loosening. He realized then what the booklet's final instruction meant: a sanctuary extends where intention settles. His presence, calm, anchored, aligned, was itself a boundary. He didn't have to speak. He didn't have to intervene. All he had to do was walk slowly enough, gently enough, that others could feel the quiet space he carried within him. He continued walking, the stones warm against his body, the name resting over his heart. The world looked the same, but he no longer moved through it as a passive participant. He had become a point of clarity in a noisy landscape, a reminder that confusion did not have to define the human experience. When he returned home just after sunset, the symbols glowed softly in the dimming light. He stepped inside and felt the sanctuary welcome him. Not with walls of protection, but with a quiet recognition: he had learned the first cycle. He had remembered what the Archons had tried to bury. He had begun the slow, gentle process of reawakening the truth within himself. And though he knew there would be more steps, deeper teachings, subtler insights, greater clarity, he also knew he was ready. Not because he had mastered anything, but because he had finally begun walking with awareness rather than fear. The stones rested where he placed them. The name glowed softly beneath his shirt. And the circle endpoint symbol on the wall watched over the room like a quiet moon. Elias sat down, breathing calmly, knowing that tonight would be still and peaceful. He whispered a final thank you to the unseen teacher who had guided him. Then he closed his eyes, letting the sanctuary settle into him as deeply as he had settled into it. If you've made it this far, I want to thank you, from the calm center of this story, to the peaceful space you're sitting in right now. The journey you just walked with Elias wasn't meant to instruct or convert, it was meant to remind. Remind you that clarity is something you can return to, at any moment, without permission from the world around you. You carry your own sanctuary. You carry your own alignment. You don't need stones or symbols to begin that process, those are simply storytelling doors. What truly matters is the intention to breathe more softly, think more slowly, and trust the part of yourself that has been whispering to you long before this video ever found its way into your day. And if this story gave you even a small sense of calm, a spark of curiosity, or a moment of inner recognition, I'd love for you to help this channel grow so more people can experience that same feeling. If you felt connected to Elias's journey, please subscribe, it genuinely supports the work and helps me continue creating more stories that blend ancient symbolism, introspection, and states of quiet awakening. Before you go, consider giving this video a like. It not only helps the algorithm notice us, but it also sends a small ripple of encouragement my way. And if there's someone you know who might resonate with these themes, someone who could use a moment of stillness or a gentle reminder of their own inner clarity, please share this video with them. Every share helps this channel reach the people who might truly need it. Thank you for spending this time with me. Until the next story, walk slowly, breathe gently, and carry your sanctuary with you.